Welcome back to the Friday Show presented by the Jockey Club. Save the date, August 3rd, the first Thursday in August for the Jockey Club Roundtable up in Saratoga Springs, New York. It's a big week there. Hall of Fame induction the following day on Friday, and it's Whitney weekend, big racing at Saratoga Springs in early August. I'm Ray Paulick, joined by Editor-in-Chief Natalie Voss. And our guest this week, Remi Bellocq, who's the Executive Director of BCTC Equine, which is part of the community college program in Lexington, Kentucky. Remi has worked a lot of jobs throughout the years in the industry. We won't go through them all, Remi, because our time is limited here. But really appreciate you joining us. And the reason we wanted to talk to you is you were instrumental in Natalie's series on the mental health challenges facing jockeys, which are a two-part series that ran earlier this week. So I just want to kick this off with, and by the way, one of the things you did previously was you were an amateur jockey. I know you had the amateur rider series for a number of years. So you not only have taught jockeys, you sort of advised them on their careers, how to get started and so on as part of the educational program, but you were a jockey yourself, although an amateur rider.
Yeah, I can teach him how to be a bad jockey, but yes.
Yeah, so there are so many elements to what Natalie wrote about. If you could just kind of do a few bullet points, what's the toughest part of the job of a jockey?
Well, I think the one that jumps to the top of my head is everything else being equal. When jockeys are trained in Europe, in France, England, Ireland, anywhere in the world, it's going to be the same basic foundation of preparation, training, all the skills that are involved like any other athlete. What's unique about being a jockey in the United States, though, is that as opposed to maybe having a contract with a big racing stable where you're going to be the first string rider for that stable, like it used to be here in the States many, many years ago, by and large, most jockeys are independent contractors. In other words, you have to hustle, almost like an actor auditioning for parts. And you going barn to barn, talking yourself up, and convincing a trainer that you're the best person to ride that particular horse, because when you're starting off, you may have an agent, but you'll have to do a lot of the selling yourself. That's a really tough thing for a lot of younger folks today. Many people don't realize a lot of younger folks aren't those soft skills of being able to interact with other people and sometimes, kind of flattering yourself and being, it's very, very hard for younger folks to do. And so in many cases, we may have a young rider. And by the way, over 95% of our students are young ladies. And so to walk into a barn and be able to tout yourself, it's a pretty unique skill. You take somebody like Julie Crone, for example. As wonderful and amazing of a rider as she was in her career, she was also had a wonderful personality, could walk into a barn and charm the socks off of the trainer and ride their horses. It's hard to find those kind of soft skills today. And in many cases, a young person will go into the barn and the trainer will, say, get out of here. I don't want you and all that. And they take it personally and they just kind of, crumble. And it's a hard thing to teach. And the mental aspects of that rejection can be very difficult.
Yeah, that sort of raises an interesting question, like for you, Remi, through your work at BCTC, obviously you can teach students the skills and the physical fitness side of getting on a racehorse, but how do you, or can you, I guess, really sort of prepare them for the mental pressures that they're going to come up against? Because I imagine they probably think that they know how hard it is until they go out and do it. And then I'm betting it's one of those things that there's sort of an additional kind of learning curve on the mental side of things.
Yeah, it's a very hard thing to teach, almost impossible, because either a young person has that kind of, self-confidence to be able to go into a situation and, talk their way into riding that particular horse this morning. going to the barn and saying, I'm the best person in the world to ride that horse, and I'm going to prove it to you have to have that kind of chutzpah, to be a good jockey. And the great ones have that to a great extent, on top of they have incredible skill, and they go out there, talk their way into a mount, but end up winning the race. And then once you get to that particular level in your career where you're a known quantity, you've won a lot of races, you don't have to do as much talking when you're at that point in your career where you're established. And so there's less pressure, there's less stress. You're riding better horses, you're making more money with fewer amounts. I'm talking about the beginning of a kid's career when they're a 10-pound bug and, they don't know how the world works. And, it's a tough challenge for a lot of them.
I think that, Remi, you and I talked a little bit about, when you mentioned it, the differences between sort of the system here versus in other countries where it's more common for jockeys, at least starting out, to be a salaried apprentice someplace. How does that sort of provide them the space to learn on the mental side of things too? Do they sort of end up therefore having like a little bit of built-in mentorship from the trainer and from, other salaried riders?
Yeah. So like, for example, I cut my teeth a little bit in France and in Chantilly, and although I wasn't a full-fledged apprentice, I rode there, summers and as an amateur rider and all that. But so the way it works there, the students from the age of about 14 or 15 to 17, they'll be in a school, almost like they'll have dormitories. They'll be in a school that there's a school setting, and then they are sent out every morning to a particular trainer who will take on that apprentice. And it's like in the old days in America, where they in their last year of school, they'll sign an apprenticeship contract with that trainer. And so that trainer, the expectation of that trainer is to kind of, it's almost like graduate school. The student now will be riding horses in the yard and in the mornings. And there's a mentorship process while the student is very young. And they'll ride, a few races. It used to be that, any money that they made would be put away in a bank account for them. So there was that period of between the ages of about 17 and 20 when they were being kind of managed, by their apprenticeship, trainer. And then at that point, once they've gotten through those formative years, then they're mature enough and old enough to then, if they want to go on and become a freelance rider or what have you, they're ready for that. The problem here is that you get a kid who's 16 or 17 and they're a bug rider. They have to grow up really super fast, because now when they win a few races, they got a nice car in the garage, nobody's there to manage their money. They're kind of on their own. And some of them thrive in that environment, but a lot of them don't. And they just don't succeed. And so what happens to them then? Well, with our school, they've learned how to do other things. They can gallop horses, they can work on a breeding farm, they can, groom or do what have you. So they have other skills. But the mental aspect of that very important period of years between when they're very young is where things can go off the rails.
Remi, one thing that you mentioned is the criticism that jockeys face when they're just getting started, and really not just when they're getting started, as they mature too. In the old days, it was the walk from the track to the jocks room where you get heckled, maybe some people in the grandstand yelling at you, and you kind of learn to deal with that. Now it's almost nonstop with social media, forums, and it's tough for jockeys to ignore, especially if they have Twitter or Facebook or whatever. But it's also a real problem for them because they can never kind of leave work, right? I mean,
right.
The criticism goes well beyond the last race of the day.
Right. And that's really a part of the role we play, is that we try to prepare our students in the best way we can for that particular fact. The ones that want to go on to be riders, but even all of them, because we live in an age of social media, and what we try to do is recreate in our program. So we have 12 horses, off the track horses, that we house right here at the Thoroughbred Center. So the students spend half of their day in an actual training barn, and we try to replicate it as much as we can, the environment they'll be in when they go out to work. So that if they leave here and they go work for Todd Pletcher or Christophe Clement or somebody, we come at about as close to that environment, short of going there. I use the analogy: work college football, that's the NFL, and sometimes they really, there's a big difference, but we come close. And to the point even where when they're in our barn and we're surrounded by a couple other trainers, Jeff Mulcahy, a couple other trainers, that if they're doing something wrong and they get yelled at by somebody else, another trainer, another assistant trainer, because they might get hurt or whatever, a lot of kids who go to other equine studies program have never been yelled at or kind of tell you're not doing that right. You're going to cause a problem. And they kind of, when it first happens, they go, how dare you, and so we try to make sure that they're ready for that. There's going to be some criticism, and that you got to be able to absorb the compliments and the criticisms the same way. And a good rider, a good jockey who will ride race 1 terribly and race 3 like a genius knows that they got to keep that even keel. That don't let that bad race affect you, because you're riding in another 20 minutes and you got to be back on your A game. Same way, if you just won a brilliant race, don't get too high, because, there's another one coming up. So teaching them that kind of how to handle those two aspects of our industry is a key part of what we do.
I think one thing that I sort of, I kind of suspected this going into researching the series. And then as I talked to more people, it just sort of it seemed truer to me that, with everything that jockeys are dealing with, the weight, the needing to be fit enough while being light, the financial stress, the constant feedback from people. I feel like it's really kind of not so surprising that we encounter jockeys that might be having mental health problems, either in the form of addiction problems or, as we've seen a couple of suicides from former jockeys recently. My sort of takeaway was it's kind of amazing that there's not more, honestly, of those things, because it's just such a pressure cooker for a young person or for somebody who's maybe not so young anymore. What is your sort of response to that?
Well, I think that these situations, these conditions, by the way, have existed, as long as I've been in the business. Back in the 70s and late 60s and 70s, 80s, now jockeys went through a lot of the same things. Now, they didn't have social media and other things, but they had to drop a lot of weight. They had to deal with, criticism, things like that. So all those elements were there. What I do think the difference between then and now is that, and I pointed this out in an interview, is that a lot of young athletes, young jockeys, look at the Tiger Woods model of where they are so much more into fitness, into going to the gym, into, treating this industry as a serious profession, fitness wise, training wise, and everything else. So, Ferrin Peterson, an example I gave you as a young rider, she's going to the gym and running and doing all these things. And we were on a run once, and I said, I've never seen riders back in my day, back in the 70s. They never went, to the gym or jogging or anything like that. And so I think that kind of, is a good thing that we see with a lot of the young riders today, where they're, are looking at for example, the Tiger Woods or the golfers who changed that whole sport in their approach. And I think that helps quite a bit with substance abuse and things like that. Still, there's still the underlying pressures that, if the individual doesn't have the tools to be able to handle that, they can go down the wrong path, unfortunately. And it's one of the side effects of not just our sport, but I imagine other professions and industries and things like that.
I think in general, I mean, young people growing up today face pressures that we never had to face, from social media, peer pressure. I mean, there was always peer pressure, but now it's out in public with social media, and suicide rates are up among young people. And I think Natalie mentioned that we saw 2 suicides this year from jockeys, and that's troubling. But it might be a reflection of society as a whole, not just the pressures they face as riders.
Well, I have a son who's in his 20s, and he's in the performing arts, and so whenever he doesn't get, an audition doesn't go well or what have you, it's heartbreaking to see how down he gets on himself. But I remind him, I said, listen, that's part of it, but you just gotta, brush off your shoulders and go at it again. Some of these young riders and all that don't have that support group. They may not have a family there that they can talk to, or parents, or somebody who's been down the road before. We're lucky in that when we started the school, we had the wonderful jockey Chris McCarron, who was there to help out. And even today, if a young rider needs some guidance, he'll call them up and help them out here and there and say, hey, here's what I went through, and you can get through this as well. That mentorship is hugely important.
Natalie, I'm curious though, what surprised you the most when you went into this reporting, the various people you talked to? Was there anything that stood out that was something you weren't expecting?
I think probably the most surprising thing for me, and Remi and I talked about this a little bit, I had always assumed that when I saw jockeys out galloping horses or grazing horses in the morning, that this was something that enabled them to kind of maybe fill in some gaps if they weren't winning a lot of races or they didn't have a lot of mounts. Well, they still had morning work. So I figured that was sort of how they balanced out the salary side of things to be bringing in enough money to offset this very high risk sort of job. And I was surprised to learn that not for all riders, but for some riders, they are in a situation where the trainer is going to expect them to do that work in the morning for free in exchange for a shot at riding the horse in the afternoon. Now, Remi and I had talked about it. That can pay off if you get on a horse, the trainer keeps his word, puts you on the horse, and you're able to win, then you're going to make more having done that than if you'd just been a gallop rider getting paid, $15 or $20 per gallop in the morning. But if the horse doesn't win or the trainer doesn't keep his word, you're in a really financially vulnerable position, and you're doing that times, several horses 6 days a week. It just sort of, I'm looking at it as somebody not having been in that situation going, that's lost income. That should be income on top of what they're making, because that's what I assumed was happening. But it's not always like that. It sort of seems to depend on the track and the rider and what sort of expectation there may be wherever they are. But I found that really surprising.
Yeah, and you can ride a bunch of horses during the week, especially if you're a 10-pound bug. You'll get a lot of business early on your first year of riding. So even a losing mount fee, if it's $100, $50, $100, if you ride enough horses, you got to pay rent and pay for the gas in the car to get back and forth and all that. But the tough part is once you lose the bug, unless you've established yourself by that point and are have an in with some key barns that will support you during that period of time when you're a journeyman rider, that's where it can get really hard. And also having the maturity once you get to that point where if you go into a slump, the worst thing a young rider can do when they have a slump is start changing things, because whatever made them successful as a bug rider, they're still riding the same way. And you tell them, you just got to wait it out. It's like somebody who's golfing, you don't start changing your clubs and everything else, because that might make things worse. And that's where you got to get that mentorship of an experienced jockey to help you through those tough times. The big problem is that that jockey's competing with you, for the mounts. And so they'll only help you so far until you start beating them. And then they go, no, I'm not going to help you anymore.
Yeah, it was interesting talking to riders about, being in the jockeys room because, as they point out, you're not often sort of hanging out with your opponents in between games or matches or whatever in other sports, although sometimes you might be. But they sort of told me it's this weird situation where we're sort of comrades in a way that we can't be with people who aren't jockeys. And so there's this greater understanding and bond, but at the same time, we are competitors, and that balance can shift between the same two people in different situations. And it's just, in a way it's comforting, but then in a way it's also like, well, this guy isn't really 100% my friend, maybe some of the time. And that would be, you could get in your head about that pretty easily, I would think, if you were somebody who got in their head a lot.
Well, the analogy I use is that being a jockey is not unlike being like a tennis player or a golfer. You're all sharing the same clubhouse. Your opponent that you're going to be competing against in a couple of minutes on center court at Wimbledon or at Augusta is right there in next locker over. The difference is that they're not riding 1,000-pound horse at 40 miles an hour. And, if you just beat that guy a nose in the big stakes race, the race before, and now all of a sudden you're on the rail and your horse is getting rank and he's right there, he or she, and you ask him, I know you hate me, but please don't put me over the rail because we're going fast and there's 9 horses behind us, and so that's another part of it that really can take a toll mentally, is that it's an extreme competition to ride in a horse race, and it lasts for a minute to 2 minutes, but it's so high energy and the stakes are so high, but you're doing it every 20 minutes. 6 or 7 times a day, and that kind of energy up down like that, as opposed to a 4-hour Super Bowl or 3, whatever. That's what can take a toll.
And Natalie, one of the things you pointed out, and Remi talked about what it's like to fall off a horse at 35 miles an hour, sit in the back of a pickup truck going down a dirt road and jump out. Yeah. It's not a matter of if, but when. They will be involved in a spill. Hopefully that it's no injury or minor injury, but they are going to happen. When you have as many as 20 horses as we have in the Kentucky Derby, but usually 8 horses, 10 horses in a race, going around turns, crowding, clipping heels, it's almost inevitable that a jockey is going to go down. And it's a dangerous sport. There's a lot of pressure mentally. Congratulations, Natalie, on the series, giving our readers a little glimpse into the challenges they face. We'll have a link to both parts in the story that goes with the Friday show this week. And Remi, thank you for what you do, trying to help people get into the industry at BCTC Equine. And thanks for your help in the story and for joining us this week on the Friday show. We really appreciate it.
Very happy to have
you. All right, well, August 3rd, Jockey Club Roundtable, Saratoga Springs, New York. Save the date, and we'll see you next week on the Friday show.
It's America's original sport, and no one covers it better than americasbestracing.net. From the sport to the lifestyle, the best races, horses, and destination venues, cocktails, gambling, fashion, and more. americasbestracing.net is a sport for you.
Support award-winning independent horse industry journalism and become a Paulick Report insider on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, insiders get access to exclusive Q&As with Paulick Report staff, insight behind our editorial process, exclusive opinions and on-site analysis, Paulick Report merch, and more. This is not a paywall. The website you know and love will always be the same. But if you want more, and you want to make our coverage even better, visit patreon.com/Paulick Report and become a Paulick Report insider today.